Thanks for watching the video. This is Pascal for EMP Reviews. This is a review of the first 4 episodes of Season 3 of Star Trek Picard. Many who have already seen all 10 episodes describe this part of the story as its own arc, so I have decided to address them as one group. The first part of this video will be my condensed summary of the shows, and my review will begin at the time posted here. The prologue shows Dr. Beverly Crusher on board her vessel, the SS Ilias, killing a couple of intruders who boarded her ship. She is badly injured in the process, but she manages to send a myriad codex subspace message and also to launch the Ilias into warp speed right at the moment more assailant ships arrive. Jean-Luc Picard and Laris are packing for a trip to Chaltok 4. He is ready to part with items from his past, but she urges him to cherish them and their memories. That night, his old comm badge is activated by Crusher's message, which included coordinates, the word Hellbird, and not to tell anyone at Starfleet about this communication. He tells Laris about his confusion of any contact from her after 20 years of silence, but she convinces him to investigate. Picard sets up a meeting with William Riker and describes his situation. Riker describes Hellbird as a virus that once affected the Enterprise during the war with the Borg and deciphers the actual coordinates outside of Federation space while both are being watched. On Metalis Prime, Raffi Musiker portrays an addict in need of a fix and in need of getting back into Starfleet. This, supposedly, could be done if she could get some covert information, especially about any super weapons. Her contact responds only with something called the Red Lady and then strongly advises to cease her probing. Per Riker's suggestion, he and Picard board the Titan with the ruse that they are doing a routine surprise inspection and then to redirect the ship's destination to Crusher's location. Commander Annika Hansen, that is 7, greets them and warns to expect a cold reception from Captain Shaw. After Titan's launch, when they meet him for dinner, he is already eating and barely salutes them when they enter the room. A few insults later, he also denies their request to change course. Meanwhile, Raffi communicates with her handler, who apparently has never revealed himself. Both her and this supervisor cannot decipher this Red Lady or who stole experimental weapons from the Daystrom station. Under a bit of pressure from 7, both Riker and Picard reveal to her what their true intentions are. She expresses her frustrations at her general place in Starfleet and having to answer to a miserable captain, and then reveals that she redirected the ship to a position very close to Crusher's coordinates, as the Doctor herself is right outside of Federation space, inside a nebula, which greatly interferes with sensors. Shaw wakes, places the ship on alert, and angrily orders a full report. Riker and Picard leave with a shuttle. Raffi discovers that the Red Lady is in reference to a statue of Starfleet Captain Rachel Garrett and quickly heads for its location, District 7. Once there, her words of warning reach no one as communications are scrambled, and she watches the effects of the weapon as it sucks a building through a portal and then drops it a short distance away. Riker and Picard enter the Ilias, split from each other, with Picard finding Beverly in a medical pod. They then are greeted by her son Jack, who describes that he and his mother have been pursued throughout several systems by a ship, the Shrike, which then reveals itself. 2 weeks before the events of the previous episode, Jack is inspected by the crew of a Fenris Ranger vessel. Under the guise of coming to their planet for humanitarian medical reasons, He actually gives the men weapons and cuts the captain a percentage of the cells of the rifles. Before leaving, the Fenris leader communicates to someone that Jack has been located. Back in the present time, Jack explains that a multitude of races have been chasing him and his mother. They all have been dispatched by the crew of the Shrike, but Jack doesn't know why. Outside of the nebula, the Shrike and its intense armament are detected by the Titan. Despite Seven's wishes, Captain Shaw refuses to go into the nebula to help Riker and Picard and then dismisses her. The Shrike strikes the Ilias, destroying the shuttle. Raffi watches reports of the attack on District 7, naming a Romulan rebel faction's leader Lurok Toluco as being responsible. She contacts her handler, who orders her, per Starfleet, to stop her investigation since the identification of Toluco. A preposterous idea for Raffi, who knows the man is incapable of such an act. Seven reports to Shaw that they have detected weapons fire in the nebula and urges him to attempt to save Picard and Riker. Inside the Ilias, the Shrike fails to transport Jack as a result of countermeasures Picard installed. The ship is boarded and Riker deals with the intruders. As a result, the Shrike grabs the ship with a beam, but are interrupted by the Titan, who soon transports the men and Beverly on board. Raffi meets her ex-husband in order to have him set up a meeting with Sneed, the Ferengi who brokered the sale of the weapon from an unknown seller to Toluco. He reluctantly agrees, citing that she should focus more on their son. On the Titan, Riker, Picard, and Jack are escorted to the bridge, are chastised by Shaw, and then greeted by Vadic, the captain of the Shrike, who demands the handing over of Jack, a categorized criminal inside and outside of Federation space. She provides an hour for relinquishing him, advertises her Shrike's immense size of weaponry, and then exercises some of it by hurling the Ilias against the Titan. Eventually, Shaw and Seven discovers Jack's universal fugitive status, and the captain arrests him and then relieves Annika of her duties for getting the Titan involved in this mess. Without directly stating it, Riker insistently tries to have Picard realize that Jack is his son. Picard meets him and lists his slew of crimes, to which Jack badly defends himself, but does say that Beverly actively supported his illegal acts and that he never knew his father. Raffi meets Sneed, who, as Raffi was not aware of, had Toluco killed. This fact and other mishaps help in blowing her cover, and she is eventually rescued by Worf, her apparent handler. Jack escapes his imprisonment while Riker, in spite of the ship's doctor's advice, wakes Beverly with medication. Seven catches Jack in the transporter room and they both have a standoff. He wants to deliver himself to Vadic, a great idea according to Shaw, who orders the transfer. Riker escorts a barely functioning Crusher to meet Picard, and by staring at each other for a few moments, Picard knows the truth about Jack. Picard exercises his higher admiral authority and stops Jack's surrender, citing to Shaw that he's his son. The captain reluctantly orders preparations for battle. The Titan attacks and then is followed by the Shrike into the nebula. The Titan is barely surviving the Shrike's attacks, unable to warp due to the nebula's effects. It goes even deeper into the nebula as a temporary successful effort to hide. Many years before, Picard and Riker meet to celebrate his newborn son. William mentions that Deanna's birthing was plagued with some problems, which frightened him greatly at the time. Back on the Titan, ensigns are assigned to watch for the Shrike using regular windows, as ship's senses are useless in the environment. Energy surges strike the ship in a pattern. Sidney LaForge, Geordi's daughter and the helmsman, greets an annoyed Seven. Annika is eventually touched by the visit once Sidney describes that she understands the actions she took to help Picard and Riker. Picard requests a private conversation with Beverly. She justifies her decision not to inform Jean-Luc of Jack decades ago with evidence that he always had a target on his back from one enemy to another, and that duty always came calling from Starfleet. Picard vehemently disagrees, declaring that in spite of those circumstances, he still had a right to know. She returns with her fears that if publicly known as Jean-Luc's son, Jack would also always be a target. Meanwhile, Riker and Jack discuss the complicated situation with his newfound lineage and William's loss of his son. Beverly reiterates the occurrence of multiple factions chasing Jack, concludes that their motivation may actually be a connection with Jean-Luc. She points out that Vadic is commanding a warship, something way too aggressive for a mere bounty hunter. She also explains that Jack decided not to contact Picard when she eventually told him the truth. Picard passes on Riker's advice to speak with his son when the Shrike suddenly locates the Titan and attacks. Shaw, severely injured, hands over command to Riker. With their own attack, he and Picard successfully shake the warship away, at least for the moment. Raffi wakes in Worf's quarters, who fears the attack at the district is only the beginning of something much greater. Worf identifies Titus Rika as the criminal who told Sneed to lie about the details of his sale. They need to learn from him who stole the weapons and to stop anyone from using them. Shaw's condition is getting worse, and he frustrates over the fact that the Shrike is somehow able to track the Titan even with difficulties of detection within the nebula. Science Officer Tavine believes that they actually are not inside a nebula, but something never encountered before. Going deeper in it is ill-advised. Riker orders heading out of the area, but once there, the Shrike reveals itself right behind, and twice, the warship activates a portal that prevents the Titan from leaving. Picard urges to fight instead of more defense maneuvering, and Riker instead orders a re-entry into the nebula. The Shrike relentlessly strikes the Titan, while Jack explains to Seven that they must be trailing something the warship is using to track them. Annika realizes that it is Vertinium, the substance insulating the warp coils, and when examining engineering, she realizes that the leak was deliberate. They have a saboteur aboard. Tavine advises to maneuver away from the inner gravity well that they are now heading into, and after Riker and Picard are told about the Vartanium by Seven, Jean-Luc suggests using the ceasing of the leak by Annika to create an opportunity for attack. Riker still insists on leaving. The saboteur attacks Jack, and during their melee, he sees that it is a shapeshifter. Meanwhile, after having captured Rika, Raffi and Worf begin questioning him. Jack, under the effects of the gas in engineering, which is the result of the sabotage, experiences odd visions, some of which involved Annika. The real Annika takes him to crush her when he loses consciousness. She barely manages to revive him. Rika, disheveled, finally admits he and others stole the weapons. He also divulges that the theft was a red herring to deceive Starfleet, while the real item targeted was also being stolen from Daystrom. Worf realizes that Titus is actually a changeling, and that his unstable symptoms are the need to revert to his normal shapeless form to rest. Rika swears that all solid beings and their worlds, not to mention Starfleet, will all soon be destroyed. He liquefies and then is vaporized by Worf. Jack details Seven about his own encounter with the Changeling in engineering, while Worf describes that a terrorist division of these shapeshifters exists that did not accept their defeat in the Dominion War and so separated from the race. Worf decides that he and Raffi will head to Daystrom to continue their investigation. Seven tells Riker about the Changeling on board when the explosives it set disables the just completed repairs to the warp engines. Out of options, Riker initiates Picard's idea to attack. Torpedoes fired by the Titan are redirected against itself by the Shrike's portal weapon, severely damaging the ship and its engines. The warship leaves the area and the Titan, now spinning without control towards the gravity well. Riker dismisses Picard from the bridge, blaming him for their inevitable deaths. 5 years prior, Picard is approached by young ensigns who ask him to elaborate on some adventures described in his book. Among other things, Picard details the importance of teamwork and hope. Back in the present time in the nebula, the Titan, with no functioning weapons, receives damage from the environment and continues to lose power. Riker orders the best technical solutions he can come up with when another wave hits the ship, forcing the shutdown of shields in order to save what's left of them. He then meets with Picard and both essentially argue to apologize first. Riker assures that they will all die in a couple of hours and that it is time for Jean-Luc to meet his son intimately. Meanwhile, Seven finds the original cadet, the imposter, murdered and tells Riker, who wants to keep that fact quiet. Annika is at first angered at keeping this a secret, but then agrees to use their knowledge of the Saboteur to help in their search for it. Beverly is at this point correctly anticipating the timing of the waves and is then approached by Picard, who wants to speak with Jack. Jean-Luc and Jack enter the holodeck, and meanwhile in Shaw's quarters, he tells Seven that a sure sign that someone is a changeling, considering their perfect ability to take someone else's appearance, is their inability to answer a question based on information the actual person they are impersonating should know. He also suggests to commandeer the changeling's specific container it uses to rest while in liquid form, and to use biological residue in it to scan the ship for. Seven finds the item while Vadic contacts her superior. He orders the Shrike to enter the nebula in spite of certain damage to it and its crew if the portal device it's equipped with is brought inside that area of space. Vadic obeys the order, expelling the device from the vessel. Picard continues with his presentation to the cadets, and back in the nebula, some of the ensigns enter the holodeck. Jack expresses gratitude for this entire gesture, but ultimately feels that there is not much room for intimacy between the two of them. Seven encounters the Saboteur. It kills an ensign and destroys its container before fleeing in liquid form, having been disarmed and harmed by Seven's weapon fire. Despite Jack's misgivings, he and Picard do speak cordially, even discussing Jack being named after Beverly's first husband. They are interrupted by an even more than usual bitter Shaw, affected by his medication for his injuries, who revisits Picard's destructive actions during his time with the Borg when controlled by the Collective. He essentially takes out his survivor's remorse against Jean-Luc and is finally interrupted by Jack. Soon after, Beverly describes to Picard and her son that the waves have a pattern similar to contractions, meaning that something explosive is building up. Jack suggests somehow using the wave to exit the nebula, an idea Riker finds absurd, as too many things can go wrong with attempting such a complicated maneuver. After a poignant speech by Crusher and Picard, Riker devises a way to use the energy of the waves to power the engines. Riker prepares the crew with a speech, being honest about the dangers with the operation about to be attempted. Meanwhile, Shaw is visited by Seven and Picard, who need his help, considering his superior knowledge of the engines. William hands over navigation directions to Picard, considering his experience with the limited piloting efforts they are now forced to use. LaForge joins Shaw and Seven, who discovers that she is the Saboteur and kills it since it failed the test Shaw described earlier. With Jack's assistance, Picard successfully navigates a group of asteroids. A massive wave hits, and the plans to absorb its energies and travel with it are successful. The Shrike is dead ahead, and Riker uses the Titan's tractor beam to throw an asteroid against the ship, damaging it significantly. Beverly's anticipated birth occurs as newborn creatures float around the Titan, which itself leaves after a few moments of observing the beings. Jack and Picard then have an intimate stare, making Jean-Luc realize that at the end of his speech to the cadet 5 years prior, Jack actually asked him about any life outside of Starfleet, specifically the act of forming a family. He responded by describing that the Federation was the only family he ever needed. Riker, affected by the recent events, contacts Deanna. He discusses reconciliation, while Picard records his log, some of which ponders the identity of Vadic. Jack has more disturbing visions. The fact that Laris urged Picard to keep his mementos from the past and urging him to cherish his memories is a welcome sentiment, considering how many other old franchises have plot elements suggesting the reverse. That message seems to suggest that modern storytelling is somehow more valuable than older entertainment. The mentioning of value of history at the beginning of the episode immediately sets a great tone for what is to come for the entire plot of all 10 shows. I thought the special effects were great, but at times inconsistent. Some of the shots of the Titan lack contrast, but for the most part, everything was appropriately saturated and well animated. The concept of spaceships hurling objects at one another was impressive and reminded me of the Corvette destroyer scene from Star Wars Rogue One. I was first disappointed when I saw the Shrike, as it bore a strong resemblance to the Romulan ship in Star Trek from 2009. That film is a fun popcorn movie, but it does some massive damage to the Star Trek brand and lore if you are very dedicated to the franchise. I am also equally split with Star Trek Into Darkness, as it is one of my favorite sci-fi films, but it does not do a good service to the original Ricardo Montalban character and narrative. I must agree with a repeated complaint about this season as far as how dark the lighting is. I actually think it is worse in episode 4, as I actually had to turn off the lights in my room to get a clear view of the visuals. Granted, this was due to the Titan purposefully running low on power. But for other episodes, this problem is perhaps due to the reportedly extremely limited budget they were under for the production of this season. If the bulk of the funds were focused on the special effects, then I certainly find that decision acceptable, since I did enjoy them, though I wish a bit more funding was assigned for the rather lackluster attempts at de-aging Patrick Stewart and Jonathan Frakes. I will always hate the fact that Picard is actually a facsimile of the real captain, but this season approached that awful creative decision almost only in passing, and that's all that was needed. The less said about that fact, the better. It was also great to have the daughter of the great Christopher Plummer for Vadic. Amanda Plummer plays her well, especially with the decision to have her smoke, and is also too comedic at some points for me, but I'll leave that criticism as a nitpick. The banter and general relationship between Picard and Riker is very believable, and something that has not been seen to this level since the Next Generation episodes. It was very surprising to see William eject Picard from the bridge, but the conversations before and after that event are great and even emotional. The same way that I have an issue in most action sci-fi films where the good guys are the only ones who seem to hit their mark when firing weapons, I find it hard to believe when someone like Jack Crusher can take someone out, including this guard who clearly seems robust, with one punch. And this happens twice. and these events are different than when he was activated in episode 5 to kill the changelings assigned to apprehend him. I thought the cursing on the show was not as bad as some had reported, but then by the time Patrick Stewart impromptu'd his fucking epithet in the 3rd episode, I had to agree. That language just doesn't belong in this franchise, and are moments that briefly take me out of the show. I was surprised to see no opening credits, which definitely is not a complaint. And as much as I enjoyed the cool visuals during the end credits, the inclusion of Jerry Goldsmith's theme is a welcome return to form for this franchise. The Easter eggs there are great, and I watch this part of the episodes each time I rewatch the show. Narratively, I am satisfied not to see the return of many characters from the previous seasons. Raffi, on the other hand, is extremely well inserted into showrunner Terry Matalas's Star Trek universe, if I can call it that, and is a great type of cloak and dagger element along with Worf, though I am glad to see his position of leadership in their venture. Todd Stashwick, who plays Shaw, is very convincing in his role, and the character's motivations are justified. He is someone I have come to love to hate, sympathize with him when lamenting the, at the time, inexplicable incessant pursuit of the Shrike in the nebula, and doing so when severely injured. Shaw is a great new character in this series, and I enjoyed the numerous times he switches from being a pain in the ass to being supportive to the Riker, Picard, and Seven team. Star Trek Discovery and the first 2 seasons of Picard had stories that show disagreements between characters that are draining to watch, but the fights in this season are well justified within their plots, well acted, and acceptable for the narratives. I hope showrunner Terry Matalas is allowed to continue his work with Star Trek. However, I do not want more Picard seasons, as this finale feels like an admirable ending sequel to Next Generation's All Good Things, as I have easily dismissed the films. For Patrick Stewart, I was concerned previously that the past 2 seasons of this show and the awful multiverse of madness would be the actor's legacy. With all respect, I hope he decides to retire at this point, leaving a great mark in his career. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.